You are standing on asphalt that has gone soft in the heat, though you do not know this yet. You are only watching. A woman sits on the ground beside a fuel pump that has not dispensed gasoline in perhaps a decade, her back against the rusted metal island, one wrist raised above her head, and fastened to the pump's frame by a single handcuff. The chain drawn taut enough that her arm has begun to shake from holding the position, though she does not lower it, does not fight it, does not do anything at all except sit very still in a way that should not be possible for a living person in this kind of heat. The thermometer at a bank 40 miles east will later read 108 degrees. You do not need the number to know it. You can see it in the shimmer coming off the cracked lot, in the way the paint on the old sign above her, Route 9 Fuel and Feed, half the letters faded to ghosts, seems to bend and swim against a sky the color of dishwater. She is barefoot. Her shoes, if she had any, are nowhere in this story yet. A small brown dog, mixed breed, ribs visible beneath a coat gone dull with dust, stands at her feet and will not stop barking. It is not barking at you. It has been barking, you will learn, for the better part of an hour, at nothing, at everything, at the particular kind of silence a person makes when they have decided that screaming will not help them. Tucked into the cuff of her sleeve, folded into a small dense square gone soft and gray at the corners from sweat, is a piece of paper. Blue ballpoint ink, no signature. You do not know yet what it says. You do not know yet who wrote it, or why, or what it will cost the man who finds her to read it all the way through. He is not a hero. He will tell you that himself, if you ever meet him, in the flat, unbothered way men like him tell you anything. He is riding alone that afternoon, gray in the beard, leather gone the color of old saddle, headed north to bury his mother in a town he has not visited in years. He has no reason to stop at a gas station that has been closed since before his mother got sick. He would not have stopped at all, if not for the dog. This is where the story begins, and where, if you stay, you will see it all the way to the end. The note, the debt behind it, the 31 years that came before this afternoon, and the 22 men who will ride into this same parking lot before the sun goes down. Subscribe if you want to see how far back this debt really goes. Tell me your city in the comments. And stay until the end, because what happens to this woman by nightfall is not the part of the story anyone expects. That morning began the way most mornings began for him now. Early, silent, without ceremony. He had packed the saddlebags in the dark, before the heat could climb, because he had learned decades ago that the desert only gives you a few hours before it starts taking things back: water, shade, patience. He rode with all three rationed carefully, the way a man rations anything he has learned to live without. The road to Iron Ridge ran 290 miles through country that did not care whether a man was grieving or not. Flat scrubland gave way to broken hills, and the hills gave way to more flatness, and the sun sat overhead like something that had been left on too long. He rode with the visor up because the wind, hot as it was, felt more honest against his face than glass. He had not seen his mother in 4 years. That was a fact he did not examine too closely, the way a man does not examine a wound that has already closed over badly. She had called him twice in the last 6 months, and both times he had let it go to voicemail, telling himself he would call back when he had something worth saying. There had not been a third call. There had only been his brother's voice on the phone, flat with its own kind of grief, saying the word. Tuesday. Like it was an apology. He carried grief the way he carried most things, folded small, tucked somewhere it would not be seen. He was not a man who spoke of his mother, or of the 2 years his sister spent afraid in a house that should have been safe, or of the debt that had put that fear there. He had built a life out of not needing to explain himself, and that life had served him well enough that he rarely questioned its cost. Somewhere past the county line, he passed a diner with its windows boarded and a sign advertising pie that no longer existed. He passed a church with a hand-lettered marquee missing half its letters. He passed the wreck of a pickup truck someone had left to rust in a ditch a decade ago, and he did not slow for any of it, because grief, he had found, moves best in a straight line, and Iron Ridge was still hours north. He did not know yet about Black Ridge, or the gas station that had been closed since before his mother got sick, or the small brown dog that would soon plant itself in the gravel and bark at something the rest of the world had driven past without seeing. He only knew the road, the heat pressing down through his jacket, and the quiet arithmetic of miles left to cover before a burial he was already going to be late for, though he did not know that yet either. He had been riding for 34 years, and in that time he had learned that most of what men called toughness was only a way of standing still while the world tried to move you. He had never been the fastest in any room, never the loudest at any table, and in the club that had made him useful rather than remarkable, the one who watched a man's hands before his mouth, who could sit through an hour of silence without needing to fill it. Patience, he had come to understand, was not the absence of anger, it was anger with somewhere to put itself while it waited. He had buried enough brothers to know what patience cost. He had also learned, slower, what its absence cost, and that lesson had a date attached to it, the way certain lessons do. 1993, the summer his sister turned 19, the summer men who called themselves Kessler and Vane started leaving folded notes in the screen door of a house his father no longer owned outright. He had been 25 that year, already patched, already believing himself capable of protecting what was his. He had been wrong in ways that still visited him at odd hours. Not in dreams, exactly, but in the particular quality of certain afternoons, a slant of light through a window that resembled the one in his mother's kitchen, where his sister had sat reading a letter with her hands very still and her face very white. He had kept one of those letters. He had never told anyone why, not even the men who had eventually ridden out with him to end it, because the reason did not flatter him. He had kept it not as evidence but as a kind of penance, a reminder that he had been slow to see what was happening under his own roof, slow to read the fear in his sister's silences, until the silences had gone on for the better part of 2 years. The letter was still folded in his wallet, soft at the creases now, the ink gone the color of weak tea. He did not take it out often. He did not need to. He knew the handwriting the way a man knows a scar he stopped looking at years ago, but would recognize instantly if someone else's hand ever wore it. The debt itself had been small, in the end, smaller than the fear it had produced, which was, he had come to believe, the entire design of men who did that kind of work. Fear was cheaper than force and lasted longer. It did not require them to ever raise a hand. It only required someone to be afraid enough, for long enough, that the debt collected itself. He had not thought of any of this in months. Grief had crowded it out, the way grief does, making room for itself by pushing everything else to the margins. But margins are not the same as gone, and somewhere ahead of him, past a horizon he could not yet see past, a folded note was waiting in a stranger's sleeve, written in ink the color of something that had not faded yet. The road unspooled ahead of him, flat and white under the kind of light that had no mercy in it, the asphalt gone soft at the edges where decades of August had worked it loose from itself. Heat came up off the surface in visible sheets, bending the horizon so that the far end of the road seemed to waver like something underwater. He rode with his jaw set against it, the way he rode against most things now, and he did not expect the day to offer him anything except more of the same until Iron Ridge. He heard the dog before he saw anything else. It came thin and insistent through the wind noise and the engine, a sound that did not belong to the emptiness around it, and some old instinct, not kindness, not yet, just the habit of 30 years on a bike, the habit that made a man notice what did not fit, brought his throttle hand back before his mind had caught up to the reason. He had learned that instinct the hard way, on roads worse than this one, where the things that did not fit were sometimes the only warning a man got. The sign came into view next, tilted on its post, the paint gone to chalk. Route 9 Fuel and Feed. Half the letters lost their color entirely, bleached down to the metal beneath, and the whole structure shimmered at its edges in the heat, the way everything shimmered out here past noon, so that for a moment the station looked less like a building than like a memory of one, something the desert was in the process of erasing. He slowed further. Not out of any sense that something was wrong, he would not have called it that, not yet, not in those words. It was closer to the caution a man develops without deciding to, the same caution that made him check his mirrors at intersections long after the war was behind him, that made him note the exits in any room he sat in. A dog barking like that, at nothing, in heat like this, was a fact that did not resolve on its own. Facts that did not resolve were worth 5 seconds of a man's attention. That was all he was giving it. 5 seconds, a slowed bike, eyes moving across the dead pumps and the boarded window, and the gravel lot empty of anything that should have been making a dog bark at all. He did not see her yet. The angle of the sun and the angle of the island where the pumps stood put her in a wedge of shadow he had not yet crossed into, and so for another few seconds, the only thing his mind held was the dog, small, brown, frantic in a way that seemed disproportionate to an empty lot, and the tilted sign, and the heat, and the specific quiet of a road he had ridden 100 times before without ever once slowing down for it. 31 years is not a long time to a mountain, but it is a long time to a mailbox, and in the spring of 1993, the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive in Iron Ridge was a cheerful thing, dented on one side from a snowplow, painted over twice, standing at a lean that nobody had bothered to fix because the house it served was full of people too busy living to notice a lean. His sister was 22 that spring. She worked the counter at a feed store on weekdays and sang in the choir at a church she had stopped believing in around 16, out of habit more than faith, because the singing itself was the thing she loved and not the sermon that came after it. She kept her hair long and unbraided and wore the same pair of boots until the soles went soft, and she had a laugh that came up out of her like something that had been waiting all day for permission. She was, by every account that still exists of her, a photograph here, a story told at a Christmas table, a line in a letter she wrote once and never sent, the kind of young woman who believed the world owed her nothing and would probably give her plenty anyway. The letter came on a Tuesday. He remembers the day because he had been home on leave, restless in the particular way of men who had not yet learned what to do with quiet rooms, and he was the one who brought the mail in from the box with the lean, sorting through it on the kitchen table the way their mother liked it sorted. Bills in one pile, everything else in another. The envelope did not announce itself. It was plain, off-white, typed address, no return, the kind of envelope that could have held a coupon or a summons and gave no clue which. His sister opened it standing at the counter with a dish towel still over one shoulder, and he remembers, this is the part that stayed, the part that would not leave him for 31 years, that she read it twice. Not because it was long, it was 4 sentences. She read it twice, the way a person rereads a sentence they are hoping will change on the second pass. She folded it back along its original creases, tucked it into the pocket of her apron, and went back to the dishes as though nothing in the room had shifted at all. When he asked her what it was, she said it was nothing, a mistake, somebody's bill sent to the wrong house. Her voice was even, her hands were not. He noticed the hands and said nothing, because at 24 he had not yet learned that the noticing was supposed to lead to a question, and the question was supposed to lead somewhere, and that somewhere might have mattered before the second letter came. The dog had stopped barking by the time he brought the bike to a full stop on the cracked apron of Route 9 Fuel and Feed. Kickstand down, engine ticking as it cooled in air that pressed against him like a hand held flat to his chest. 108 degrees, the kind of heat that made the horizon swim and the paint on the pumps blister and curl at the edges. He swung his leg over slow, the way a man moves when his knees have logged enough highway to know better than to hurry, and he stood for a moment just looking, the way he had learned to look at a room before he walked into it, a habit older than the club, older than the war before the club, a habit that had kept him alive in places this Arizona two-lane could not imagine. She was sitting on the concrete island between the 2 dead pumps, one wrist drawn up and back at an angle that told him before he saw the cuff itself, her spine straight against the pump housing, her knees together, her bare feet tucked beneath her as if she had arranged herself that way on purpose, as if stillness were something she had chosen rather than something done to her. He noted the sunburn starting at her collarbone. He noted the dust ring around her ankles where sweat had dried and dust had found it. He noted that she was not crying, was not calling out, was not straining against the cuff the way a person strains when they still believe straining will do something. He walked toward her slowly, the gravel loud under his boots in a lot, with no other sound but wind and the dog's low, watchful whine, and he kept his hands visible and low, the way he would with a spooked animal or a man holding something he didn't want to hold. He stopped 6 feet off. Read her face the way he would read weather. She was watching him the way a person watches a door they are not sure will open or close. Her composure unsettled him more than tears would have. Tears, he understood. This was something colder, something practiced. A girl who had already done the arithmetic on what screaming would cost her and decided the number came back negative. "You need water," he said, not a question. She didn't answer that. Her eyes moved to the dog, then back to him, and something in her shoulders eased half an inch, no more. "He's fine," she said, her first words. Her voice was dry as the asphalt. "He's just thirsty." He looked at her a long moment, filing that away, that her first words, cuffed to a fuel pump in the worst heat of the year, had been about the dog and not herself. He crouched, slow, the way you'd crouch near a dog that had already bitten someone once. His knees popped. He didn't reach for her. He reached for the small bowl of shade the pump island threw, testing it with his palm, and set his water bottle there instead, close enough for the dog but not for her, watching to see what she'd do with that choice. She didn't move for it. She watched the dog drink first. "What's his name?" he said. "Doesn't have one." A pause, measured, like she was deciding how much a name cost. "He followed me from the Chevron on 9, 2 days ago." "You been out here 2 days?" "No." She looked at the cuff on her wrist, then at the chain, looped through the pump housing, with the flat interest of someone reading a gauge. "Since this morning." He didn't ask who. He'd learned that much in 50-some years, that the first question people flinch from is never the one that matters, and a girl who could name a stray dog's loyalty in one sentence and say nothing about her own wrist wasn't going to hand him a name on the first pass either. He asked instead about the note, just tipped his chin toward the cuff of her sleeve, where a triangle of white paper showed, folded small, tucked like a bookmark. "That for me?" "It's not for anybody." She said it flat, no defiance in it, just fact. "It's for whoever finds me." "I found you." "Then I guess it's for you." She didn't hand it over. She let him take it, which was its own kind of answer, that she had run out of reasons to protect a piece of paper, though not out of reasons to protect herself. He didn't open it yet. He held it in 2 fingers the way he'd hold a live wire, and studied her instead, the sunburn starting along her collarbone, the cracked line of her lips, the stillness in her that didn't come from shock. Shock trembled. This didn't. "Anybody coming back for you?" he said. "Eventually." No fear in the word. Something closer to scheduling. "You want me to still be here when they do?" For the first time, something moved behind her eyes. Quick. Gone. "No," she said. "I want the dog somewhere with water." He almost smiled at that, and didn't, because there was nothing funny in a woman handcuffed to a fuel pump in 108-degree heat, spending her one wish on a stray. He'd seen that particular arithmetic before, decades back, in a kitchen in Prescott County, a girl at a table refusing to cry in front of her brother because crying was a currency she'd decided not to spend either. He unfolded the note. The kitchen in Prescott County had yellow curtains that year, the kind that faded in the window until they went the color of weak tea, and it was through that light that the 2 men first came, on a Tuesday, in October, 3 weeks after the burial. They did not knock hard. That was the thing he remembered most, decades later, holding a folded page in 2 fingers outside a shuttered gas station, how gently men could knock when they already knew the door would open. They wore collared shirts. No ties but pressed collars, as if cruelty required a dress code just formal enough to be mistaken for legitimacy. One carried a clipboard, the other carried nothing at all, which was somehow worse, because it meant he didn't need to consult anything to know the number. "We're not here to upset anyone," the one with the clipboard said, and he said it the way a dentist says this won't hurt, meaning it would, meaning the saying of it was already the first small hurt. Their mother had been dead 3 weeks. Their father had been dead longer than that in every way that mattered, dead to debt and drink both, and it was the sister, 17 that autumn, who answered the door, because their mother could not and their father would not. She did not cry. That detail mattered enough to outlive 31 years. And she stood in the doorway in a house dress with a dish towel still over one shoulder, and she listened to a stranger explain, in a voice built for insurance appraisals, that her late father's obligations did not dissolve with his body, that the family retained certain arrangements, that a schedule of expectations existed and would continue to exist until it was satisfied. He used the word satisfied. He used the word arrangements. He did not raise his voice once, because he did not need to. The calm itself was the instrument. The dog they'd owned then, an old shepherd mix gone gray around the muzzle, barked twice from the yard and was told, by the second man, without any particular malice, to hush now, in the tone of a man correcting a child at a dinner table, and the dog obeyed, and that obedience frightened her more than any shouting could have. They left a letter that day, blue ballpoint, a looping hand that slanted right, the T's crossed high and hard, like a signature disguised as punctuation. It explained nothing new. It only confirmed, in writing, what the voice had already made clear, that this was not a threat, because threats implied uncertainty, and there was no uncertainty here, only scheduling. She kept that letter folded into a paperback for 2 years before she finally gave it to her brother, the way people hand over the one object they can no longer carry alone, and he had folded it smaller still and put it in his wallet, where it had ridden, unread by anyone else, through every year since. Now, outside Route 9 Fuel and Feed, he opened a different page, and the slant of the T's reached across 31 years to meet him. He put the wallet away before he let himself look at her sleeve again, because there was an order to things, and the order mattered more now than it had in 31 years of not thinking about it. The paper was there, folded into a small rectangle the size of a matchbook, tucked against her wrist bone where the cuff had rubbed the skin raw and pink. She had not tried to hide it. She had not tried to show it either. It sat where someone had put it, the way a tag sits on a piece of luggage that no longer belongs to the person carrying it. The heat had not broken. It stood on the asphalt in visible sheets, bending the far tree line into something liquid, and the dog had gone quiet at her feet, its barking spent, its body pressed to her ankle as if it, too, understood that the next few seconds required stillness. He did not reach for the note. He crouched instead, knees cracking in the way that 58 years insisted on announcing themselves, and he held his hand open in the air between them, not toward her, not yet, just present, the way a man might show an animal he was not carrying anything sharp. "That letter in your sleeve," he said. "Can I see it? Not can I take it, not give that to me." He had learned, decades ago, and in rooms far worse than this one, that the difference between those sentences was the difference between a man asking and a man taking, and that the second kind of man was exactly the kind this letter had been written by. She looked at his hand for a long moment, longer than the question required, as though she were deciding not whether to trust him, but whether trust was still a thing she had any use for. Then she nodded, once, and turned her wrist toward him without lifting her arm any higher than the cuff allowed. He drew the paper free with 2 fingers, careful not to touch more of her skin than the task demanded, and he unfolded it slowly, the crease lines gone soft and gray from having been opened and closed too many times already, by hands he would never meet and had no wish to. The handwriting rose off the page before the words did. He had known it would. He had known it in the second he'd seen the corner of it against her wrist, the way a man knows a voice on the phone before the first full sentence lands, some older part of the brain doing the recognizing before the newer part has caught up enough to be surprised. The T's stood tall and hard, crossed high, slanting right like something built to lean into a wind that wasn't there. He read it once, standing in the heat with the dog watching him and the pump gauge behind her reading 0, and when he finished, he did not fold it the way he had folded the other one all those years ago. He kept it open in his hand. "Who gave you this?" he said, though he already believed he knew the answer and was only waiting, the way he had waited 31 years, to hear it confirmed out loud by someone else's mouth. Talia did not answer right away. She watched the dog instead, the small brown mixed breed circling twice before sitting on her bare foot as if it had always belonged there, and when she finally spoke, her voice had the flatness of someone reciting a grocery list rather than a sentence that had been carried in her sleeve since morning. His mother wrote it. She said it would be easier for me to understand if I saw it in her handwriting instead of hearing it from him. He looked down at the page again. Easier to understand, as if cruelty required legibility to be effective, as if the shape of the letters mattered more than the shape of what they demanded. The note explained, in the unhurried cursive of someone accustomed to writing things that would never be questioned, that Talia's refusal to marry into the family had activated an old arrangement, that her father, 18 months in the ground now, had left behind a debt that only her marriage could settle, and that leaving her here, in the heat, chained to a fuel pump with no water and no shade, was not punishment exactly. It was demonstration, proof of what happens when an agreement made by the dead is broken by the living. The name at the bottom of the page was not a signature. It was a stamp, faded blue, half smudged by sweat or time or both. Kessler and Vane Recovery, Prescott County. He had seen that stamp before. Not this exact impression, not this exact ink, but the shape of it, the particular arrogance of a business that put its own name beneath a threat as if daring anyone to complain to someone who might care. He had seen the handwriting before, too. Not this hand exactly. 31 years is enough time for a hand to age, for the T's to lean a little further, for the loops to loosen at the edges the way a person's grip loosens on everything eventually. But the bones of it were the same high crossing on the T's. The same slant, like a fence built to hold back weather that hadn't arrived yet but was always expected. He did not tell her what he was thinking. He folded the note along its old creases, careful, the way you fold something you intend to keep rather than discard, and slid it into his breast pocket instead of handing it back. "You said his mother wrote it," he said. "Not him." "He doesn't write things down," Talia said. "He just does what she tells him." The dog shifted against her ankle. Somewhere behind the station, a truck passed on the county road, slow, unbothered, gone. Deacon crouched again beside the pump island, running his thumb along the chain link at her wrist. But his mind had already left the gravel and the heat, and gone back 31 years to a kitchen table, in a house that no longer stood, to a letter he still carried folded in a wallet that had outlived 3 jackets and 2 marriages, to a sister who had stopped answering the phone before 9 at night for 2 years, because she never knew, until the ringing stopped, whether it would be someone she loved or someone counting what her father owed. The kitchen in that other decade smelled of scorched coffee and the particular staleness of a house with its windows shut against summer, because their mother had read somewhere that closed windows kept the cool in, though there was no cool to keep. He was 26 that August, home on a Sunday because his sister had asked him to be, though she hadn't said why, only that their mother wanted the family together. She was 34 days from her 21st birthday, sitting at the table with her hands flat on the wood like she was holding it down, and their mother stood at the stove not cooking anything, just standing, the burner cold beneath an empty pot. The letter was already on the table when he walked in. He remembered that it had arrived before him, that whatever was going to happen had already started without him, the way things in families often do. His sister slid it across the table without looking at him, blue ballpoint, looping and patient, the kind of handwriting a person uses when they have all the time in the world and know it. It named their father, 6 months dead by then, and a sum that meant nothing to him because he'd never seen the books, never known there were books, only known that his father had worked 2 jobs and still come home smelling of diesel and worry, and had never once explained why. They called the church, his sister said. They talked to Pastor Ellis like it was nothing, like asking after somebody's health. Their mother said nothing. Their mother had said nothing for 3 days, he learned later, had been carrying it alone because she did not want to frighten her children before she had to, and had failed at that, the way people fail at holding back weather. He asked who these people were. His mother said a name, Kessler, the way you say a name you've decided not to be afraid of out loud, even while your hands, wiping a counter that was already clean, betray you completely. He was 26 and had no money and no lawyer and no idea that 4 counties away there were other families reading the same handwriting on the same kind of paper, learning the same lesson about debts that outlived the men who made them. All he had was the shape of his own uselessness, sitting at a table that no longer exists, across from a sister who would spend the next 2 years flinching at telephones, while their mother stood at a stove making nothing, guarding a door that would not, in the end, hold. The gas station awning threw a rectangle of shade across the concrete, and he stepped into it now, unhurried, the way a man moves when he already knows what he is about to find and needs one more moment before the finding becomes real. His wallet had gone soft at the fold from 31 years of being carried, the leather worn pale in a crease shaped like nothing but itself. He worked it out from behind a card he no longer used for anything, an old insurance card from a company that had stopped existing sometime in the 90s, kept for reasons he had never once explained to himself. The letter inside had been folded so many times the creases had become a second kind of paper, softer than the rest, threatening to separate at the intersections. He opened it with the same care a man uses on something that might not survive being opened again. The ink had browned at the edges. The loops of the handwriting still climbed the way they'd climbed then, tall and looping and strangely genteel, the kind of penmanship that gets praised in a third-grade classroom and never unlearned, applied here to sentences that had nothing genteel inside them. He held it beside the note that had come out of her sleeve. He did not need long. 31 years is enough time to convince a man his memory has softened the edges of a thing, rounded it into something less exact than it was, and he had half expected to find two documents that only resembled each other in the way that all old threats resemble each other. That was not what he found. The capital K leaned the same 11 degrees in both. The lowercase g's dropped their tails in the same small hook, an idiosyncrasy no two hands share by accident. Even the phrasing carried the same false courtesy, the same habit of calling a threat an arrangement, as though threats improved by being addressed formally. He stood there a long moment with both papers in his hands, one from a kitchen table that no longer existed and one from a girl's sleeve on a fuel pump island 108 degrees under an August sky, and understood that he was holding two ends of the same rope, still being pulled by the same hands, 31 years apart. The dog had stopped barking. It sat now in the thin shade of the pump, watching her the way dogs watch weather. She was watching him fold the old letter back along its worn creases, and something in her face changed. Not surprise, not quite, but the particular stillness of a person recognizing that the man in front of her is not simply helping her. He is remembering something. She did not ask what. She had the instincts of someone who had learned that questions could cost more than silence, and so she waited, the cuff still hanging loose from her wrist where the chain had been, and the heat pressed down on both of them equally, indifferent to what either of them now knew. He put both papers away, the old one into the wallet's worn fold, where it had lived for 31 years, the new one into the breast pocket of his cut, against his sternum, where he could feel its edges through the leather when he breathed. It was not a decision he announced to himself. It simply happened, the way a man decides to carry a thing he has decided not to put down. He looked at her wrist. The cuff hung open now, but the skin beneath it told its own report. A raw pink ring, already rising, already darkening at the edges where the metal had bitten in against bone, with no give in it, no slack, hours of a body's small movements working the steel deeper instead of loose. He had seen rope burns on men who'd fallen overboard in training, had seen the marked zip ties left on wrists cinched too long during a different life he did not discuss. He knew what a mark like that cost a person to earn. It was not decorative. It was not an accident of a few careless minutes. It was the mark of something done with intention, by people who had done it before and would do it again, people who understood exactly how long a body could be left in weather like this, before the weather itself became the punishment, so that no one need admit to inflicting anything at all. Kessler and Vane were still in business. 31 years, and they had not closed, had not softened, had not been made to answer for a single one of the letters that had gone out under that looping hand. They had only changed their instrument. In 1993, the instrument had been paper, folded and mailed, threatening a family from a safe distance measured in stamps. Now the instrument was a girl in the sun, handcuffed to a fuel pump like a package left for collection, and the paper had simply moved from the mailbox to her sleeve, closer now, closer to the skin, as though 3 decades of practice had taught them precision. He noticed that his own jaw had tightened, and he made himself unclench it, the way he had trained himself to do decades ago, because a man's face was information, and he had spent a long time learning not to give any away for free. But something had already slipped. He felt it the way he felt weather changing before it arrived, not through thought so much as through the body registering a pressure shift no instrument could name. His sister had lived 2 years afraid of an envelope. This girl had lived one afternoon afraid of a chain, and the chain had left something in her wrist that would not fade for weeks, maybe longer, a private ledger written on her own skin. He crouched, finally, closer to her than he had allowed himself yet, and took her wrist in his hand, carefully, the way he might hold a bird that had already been handled too roughly by someone else. "Who taught them to do this?" he said. Not really a question, and she looked at him like a person deciding, for the first time in a long while, whether an answer might actually be safe to give. She did not answer him, not yet, and he did not press. He let her wrist rest in his palm a moment longer, then set it down as gently as he had lifted it, and stood, and let his eyes go somewhere else for a while, because some things needed a man to look away in order to be born. It was in that looking away that the other August came back to him, the 131 years gone, when his sister had been 19, and the letters had started arriving on a Tuesday, always Tuesdays, as if the Kesslers kept a schedule, the way other men kept appointments with dentists or bankers. There had been 6 of them who rode out that first time, not 22, not yet a number the club counted proudly, just 6 men on borrowed gas money who had heard a girl crying through a screen door and decided that was enough. They had not raised a hand. That was the thing he remembered clearest, clearer than the faces, clearer than the dust on the Kessler porch, that Wade Kessler's father had come to the door in an undershirt with a shotgun leaned inside the frame where he thought no one would notice it, and the 6 of them had simply stood there, unmoving, until the old man's certainty ran out of him like water out of a cracked jar. Someone had said, quietly, that the debt belonged to a dead man now, and dead men didn't pay, and living daughters didn't inherit fear along with furniture. That was all. No fists, no threats traded like currency. Just 6 men standing in a yard until a frightened girl's name stopped being worth the trouble of chasing. It had taken the better part of 2 years after that for the letters to fully stop, and longer still for his sister to stop flinching at the mail slot, at car doors, at the particular hour of late afternoon when the postman used to come. The debt was forgiven on paper within a season. The fear took its own separate accounting, paid down slowly, in small, useless installments, the way real debts to real fear are always paid. He had kept one of those letters. He had never told anyone why, not the road captain, not his own wife while she'd been living, not even his sister, who probably assumed he'd burned it with the others. He had simply folded it smaller and smaller across 3 decades, until it became a shape more than a document, something he carried the way other men carried photographs of children they'd lost. He looked back down at the girl now, at the pale ring already rising on her wrist, and understood, with the flat certainty of a man reading weather he had seen before, that this was the same document, rewritten in the same hand, delivered 31 years later to a girl who had not even been born when his sister first learned to be afraid of Tuesdays. He did not say any of this to her. There was nothing in the moment that called for a man's private accounting of 31 years, and he had learned long ago that grief shown at the wrong hour only frightens people who are already frightened enough. He went instead to the bike, unhurried, the way he moved toward anything that mattered, and unbuckled the left saddlebag with fingers that had done this 10,000 times, for chain locks on impound lots, for gates rusted shut behind auction yards, for a padlock on a storage unit that had held, for 6 months after the funeral home released her ashes, everything that remained of his wife. The bolt cutter came out heavy and orange-handled. The rubber grips cracked from 20 years of glove sweat and winter cold. He did not rush it. Rushing, in his experience, was how men cut themselves, or cut the wrong thing. He crouched again beside her, close enough now to see the fine dust settled in the creases of her knuckles, close enough to smell the gas and rust smell of the pump island mixed with something cleaner underneath it. Soap, maybe, or the memory of it, 3 days old. The dog had stopped barking. It sat now with its haunches in the shade of her leg, watching him with the flat, unblinking patience of an animal that had already decided he was not the danger. I'm going to cut the chain, he said. Not the cuff. Chain's the weak point. Cuff'll stay on your wrist a while longer, but you'll be loose. She nodded once and turned her face slightly away. Not from fear, he thought, but from the private embarrassment of being handled, of needing to be freed at all. He set the jaws of the cutter against the middle link, the one already discolored where the sun had been baking the same 6 inches of steel since morning, and he applied the pressure slowly, testing it, the way he tested a chain before trusting it to a bike frame. The metal gave with a sound smaller than he expected, not a snap, more a sigh, a single dull click swallowed almost instantly by the wind moving through the empty lot. The freed length of chain slid off the pump housing and fell into the dust with no drama at all. She did not pull her arm back immediately. She held it still a moment, wrist still ringed in steel and reddened skin, as if she needed to confirm with her own eyes that the tether was actually gone before she allowed her body to believe it. Then, slowly, she lowered her arm to her lap, the cuff dangling open like something already forgotten, and looked at the dog instead of at him. He hasn't had water, she said, since this morning. He looked at her for a long moment, and then at the dog, and understood that she had answered his question about herself by answering a different one entirely, and that this was, perhaps, the only kind of answer she was willing to give. There was a bowl inside the station, he guessed, or there had been once, before the doors were chained the way her wrist had been chained, and he found himself wondering how long she had watched the animal circle the pump island in the heat, rationing whatever shade the structure threw across the concrete, and saying nothing about her own throat, her own skin, the blister already forming pale and tight along the crease of her wrist where the cuff had sat since morning. He had spent 30 years reading men who lied about pain for pride, and he understood now that he was looking at someone who told the truth by omission, who had decided, somewhere in the hours she'd been sitting there, that her own suffering was not information worth spending breath on. He crouched, not because his knees wanted it, but because the dog needed to see a body come down to its level before it would stop circling, and he let it sniff the back of his hand before he reached slowly into the near saddlebag for the plastic bottle he kept wedged beside the tools, warm now, nearly hot, but water all the same. He poured a measure into his cupped palm and held it low, and the dog drank in short, frantic laps that spattered his wrist, and he watched her watch the dog drink, her whole face arranged around that small relief, none of it arranged around her own. "There's more in the bag," he said, "for you too." She didn't answer that. She reached out instead and steadied the dog's back with 2 fingers, the cuff still hanging open and forgotten from her wrist, like a bracelet she hadn't decided whether to remove, and she said, quiet, not looking up, "He followed me from the truck. They didn't want him to. I told them he'd just go home if they left him." A pause, the wind moving the loose gravel at the pump's base. He didn't go home. Deacon said nothing. He had built a life out of knowing when silence was doing more work than speech could, and this was one of those times. Because what she had just told him, without meaning to, without asking for a single ounce of sympathy for herself, was that she had spent the hours since morning more afraid for the dog's survival than her own. That fear, in her, had rearranged itself entirely around something smaller and more defenseless than she was, the way a person does only after learning, over some long, unspoken stretch of years, that no one was going to rearrange their fear around her. He walked back to the bike without saying he was going to, the way men do when they've made a decision and don't want it questioned before it's finished. The saddlebag on the right side held the phone, wrapped in a shop rag at the bottom beneath a spare set of gloves he hadn't worn in years. He had bought it 11 months earlier at a truck stop outside Flagstaff, paid cash, never registered it to anything, kept it charged in a drawer at home for the specific purpose of never needing it. This was the first time. He dialed a number he had memorized instead of saved. It rang twice. "Yeah, it's me." He gave the name they used for him inside the club, the one that meant something different than the name on his license. "I need the county map in your head. Black Ridge. Old Route 9 station, the fuel and feed, boarded up 2-3 years now." A pause on the other end, brief, the sound of a chair shifting. "That's not near you. You're supposed to be in Iron Ridge by 2. I know what I'm supposed to be doing." He said the rest in the flattest voice he owned, the one he used for insurance adjusters and hospital intake forms, because flatness kept the facts from tipping over into something that would slow him down. A woman, cuffed to the pump island, wrist-free now. Left there this morning by people connected to a debt collector operating out of Prescott County. A note in blue ballpoint he wasn't going to read aloud over an open line. A dog. No visible injuries beyond dehydration. Temperature climbing, already past 100, and would be worse by 3. Kessler, he said. Kessler in vain. There was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough for him to hear traffic somewhere behind the road captain's voice, some other stretch of highway, 40 miles from this one. You sure? I've got the letter in my wallet since '93. Same hand, same way they underline the dollar figures, twice, like the person reading it might miss it the first time. Another silence, shorter. How many you want? However many you can raise before dark. I'm not asking for trouble. I want witnesses. I want this seen by enough people that nobody can call it a rumor next week. Sheriff's office? After, not before. I don't want a black and white pulling up alone to a woman still sitting on hot asphalt with a chain in her hand, getting asked questions like she did something. The road captain didn't answer that directly. He said, instead, in the voice of a man already reaching for his keys, "Give me the address again." And Deacon gave it, slow, twice, the way he'd give a location to a medevac. Then he ended the call and stood there a moment with the sun flattening his shadow into nothing at his feet, and behind him he heard the dog shift its weight against her ankle, and he did not yet know how many would come, only that the day had stopped belonging to him the moment he'd stopped the bike. They moved into what shade there was, a narrow slab of shadow thrown by the collapsed edge of the station's overhang, where the metal had buckled decades ago and never been hauled off. It was not much shade. It was enough to matter in that heat, the difference between the sun on the skin and not, and they sat down inside it without discussing it, the way people do when there is only one sensible place to be. He had a bottle of water in the saddlebag, warm from the ride, and he gave it to her first. She drank in small amounts, careful, the way someone drinks who has learned that water can run out. Then she held it back out to him, and he shook his head once, and she set it on the concrete between them instead, where it stayed, half full, sweating in the heat. The dog climbed into the narrow gap between their two bodies and lay down there like it had been invited, chin on her knee, and neither of them moved it. "He's not yours," Deacon said, not quite a question. "He followed me from the last town." She looked down at the dog's head. "I don't know his name. I've just been calling him what he is. Which is dog." She said it plainly, without apology, and something in the flatness of it told him more than a longer answer would have. They did not talk for a while after that. The heat made talking feel like a thing that cost something, and both of them seemed to understand the cost without saying so. He watched the road instead, the long gray line of it running north toward Iron Ridge, empty in both directions, heat coming off the asphalt in a way that bent the horizon slightly, like the world itself was tired. "You didn't ask why I stopped," he said eventually. "You didn't ask why I was here." She said it without looking at him, seemed even. He almost smiled. It did not fully arrive, but something moved near his mouth that hadn't moved in a while. The dog sighed against her knee, a long, put-upon sound, and resettled itself, and she put one hand on its back without seeming to decide to, the gesture arriving before the thought did. He noticed that. He noticed, too, that in all the minutes they'd sat there, she had not once asked what would happen to her, had not asked who he'd called, or how many were coming, or what the sheriff would say when they did. She had asked only about the dog, twice, in different words, as if her own outcome were a subject she'd already made peace with, and the dog's was the only one still undecided. He filed that away the way he filed most things, without comment, and kept watching the road for the first sign of dust. They came the way weather comes, first as a change in the air, and then as a sound that had no clear point of origin, a low continuous note under the wind that resolved, over the space of a mile, into engines. He heard them before he saw them and did not move, and Talia's hand went still on the dog's back, and the dog itself lifted its head and turned toward the sound with the same instinct that had made it bark at her feet hours before, some old animal calculus of threat and safety running itself out in silence. They came in a column, not ragged, not scattered, but arranged the way men arrange themselves when discipline has become older than habit, 2 by 2, throttled down well before the gas station's cracked apron, so that what arrived was not noise but presence. 22 machines rolling to a stop along the shoulder of Route 9, with a kind of collective exhale, dust settling over boots and pipes, and the long, patient line of them stretching back toward the horizon he'd been watching for an hour. The road captain swung off first. Stocky, shaved head catching the late light, patch vest dark with sweat at the collar, he crossed the apron without hurry, looking at Talia the way a man looks at a length of chain he has just been told held someone captive, and then at Deacon, and in that look there was an arithmetic being done, hours and miles and a burial that would be finishing about now in Iron Ridge, 40 minutes north, without him. He said none of it. He only stood, hands loose at his sides, and let his eyes move once over the fuel pump and the cuff hanging open from its severed chain, and the dog now sitting upright between the two women, the young one and the animal, as if it had appointed itself a third party to whatever negotiation might follow. "Sheriff's 20 out," the road captain said. "Advocates with him." Deacon nodded. Behind him the riders were dismounting in that unhurried way of men who had learned long ago that stillness read louder than motion, some pulling water from saddlebags, some simply standing, forming without instruction a loose perimeter that faced outward, toward the empty highway, toward whatever might yet come down it, rather than inward toward the girl they had come for. Talia watched them the way she'd watched everything since morning, without visible fear, cataloging. The road captain crouched, slow, joints audible, and offered the dog the back of his hand to smell before he ever looked at her directly, and only then asked, quietly, if she was hurt, and she said no, and asked instead whether there'd be water for the dog too. There was water. Someone produced a bowl from a saddlebag with the unremarkable efficiency of men who had learned to carry what strangers might need before they knew they needed it, and set it in the shade of the pump island, and the dog drank in the loud, unhurried way of an animal that has never once considered whether it is being watched. She crouched beside it while it drank. She did not look at the men forming their perimeter along the frontage road, did not look at the cruiser's dust rising 2 miles out on the flat shimmer of the highway, did not look at her own wrist, which still carried the raw pink ring the cuff had left, even after the chain fell away. She watched the dog's throat work. The road captain noticed this. He had noticed a great many things in his life that other men called instinct, and he called only attention, the same discipline that had kept him alive through things he did not discuss, and he filed this particular detail the way he filed all the others, without comment, without urgency, the way a man notes weather that has not yet arrived but will. A girl handcuffed for hours in desert heat, offered water, asking first whether the animal had enough. He did not say it aloud. There was no use in saying it aloud. Some things, spoken, lost the weight they carried in silence, became performance instead of fact, and he had spent 61 years learning the difference. Deacon did not notice it. He was watching the road, watching the dust resolve itself slowly into a shape, a color, a county emblem on a door panel, and beneath that watching was the arithmetic he could not stop running, the burial that would happen without him, the folded letter in his wallet that had waited 31 years to be useful, the particular slant of the why. In the note that had told him everything before the girl told him anything, he was a man built for reading paper, not people. It was the road captain, always, who read the people. The cruiser slowed at the frontage road's edge and idled there a moment, as though even the sheriff needed a breath before entering a scene made of 22 men, a chained-open cuff, and a young woman kneeling in gravel beside a drinking dog. Then it turned in. A second vehicle followed at a slower pace, county plates, a woman driving alone. The dog looked up first. Talia looked up second, and something in her face, not relief, not yet, something more careful than relief, settled into place as she watched the two vehicles come to rest in the gravel, engines dying one after the other into the wide, ringing quiet of the afternoon. The county advocate's name was written on a card that Talia would carry in her pocket for 4 days before she could bring herself to call it, and the letter, the one folded 31 years in a wallet, soft at its creases as cloth, was photographed by a deputy under fluorescent light and entered into a file with a case number that meant nothing to anyone but would mean everything later. The note itself, the blue ballpoint looping across paper gone brittle in the heat, went into a separate evidence sleeve, and the man who had carried its twin in his memory for 3 decades watched it disappear into a manila folder without asking for it back. He understood, watching, that some things were his to keep only until they were needed by someone else. The arranged marriage was voided on a Thursday, quietly, the way most cruelties end. Not with a courtroom scene, but with a clerk stamping a document and a family lawyer somewhere in Prescott County making a phone call he did not want to make. Kessler and Vane recovery came under investigation the following week, a slow county process that would take the better part of a year to produce anything resembling consequence, but the machinery had started, and machinery, once started, rarely stopped for anyone's convenience. He rode to Iron Ridge alone the morning after. The funeral home had held the burial 2 days past its date out of a courtesy he had not asked for and would not have known how to ask for, and when he arrived, the folding chairs were still arranged in their rows on the artificial grass, empty now, and the hole was already closed, the earth mounded and raw and not yet sunk level with the rest of the ground. No one else came. He had not told anyone the new date, and the road captain, who might have come, understood without being told that this part belonged to one man standing in wind that smelled of cut grass and diesel from the mower parked at the tree line. He did not speak. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, the way he had stood at the gas pump island 2 days before, reading the ground the same way he had read the note, for what it would not say aloud. A funeral he had missed by hours, and a rescue that had cost him those hours, sat side by side in him now, not in balance, not in exchange, just present together, the way 2 entries in a ledger can occupy the same page without ever settling what is owed. He stayed until the mower finished its pass. Then he got back on the bike and rode toward whatever came next, the debt in his wallet lighter by 1 letter, and no lighter at all in any way that mattered. The county advocate's office in Iron Ridge occupied the 2nd floor of a building that had once been a feed store, and the stairs still smelled faintly of grain dust no amount of paint had covered. She started there on a Tuesday in early September, filling out forms at a metal desk pushed against a window that looked down on a street with more empty storefronts than open ones. The woman who trained her said later that she asked good questions, that she listened the way people listen when they have needed someone to listen to them, and no one did, filing that listening away as a kind of currency she intended to spend on other people now. She did not talk about the pump island. She did not talk about the note. She answered the phone in a voice that had learned, in one afternoon in August, exactly how much a voice can carry before it breaks, and how to keep just under that line. He heard about the job from the road captain, who heard it from someone at the sheriff's office, who mentioned it the way men mention weather, in passing, expecting no particular response. He gave none, but on a Thursday 2 weeks after that, he drove to the clubhouse in Iron Ridge with the note in a manila envelope on the passenger seat, the paper gone soft at its folds from handling, the ballpoint faded another shade toward gray. He had called ahead about a frame. Someone had found one, dark wood, glass clean on both sides, and it sat waiting on the bar when he came in, next to the small photograph that had hung on that wall for 30 years. A young woman in a denim jacket, squinting into sun, 1994, written in pencil on the back, in handwriting no one living remembered writing. He did not say much while he worked the note flat against the backing and pressed the frame closed. The road captain stood a few feet off, arms crossed, not offering to help, understanding this was not a task that wanted extra hands. When it was done, they hung it beside the photograph, the 2 rectangles close enough to touch, the paper, and the picture separated by 31 years and 1 wall stud. Someone asked, quietly, whether it should have a title beneath it, a plaque, something explaining. He said no. He said if a man needed it explained, the explaining wouldn't take. Outside, the light was going long and orange over the lot, and somewhere past the tree line, A dog he did not own barked twice and went quiet, and he stood there a while longer than the moment required. December came to Iron Ridge the way it always did, without ceremony, the cold arriving flat and gray, and settling into the bones of the clubhouse roof until the metal ticked at night like something cooling from a long fever. The charity run had been on the calendar since spring, toys and canned goods strapped to sissy bars, 100 bikes staged in the lot by 9, the route down through Black Ridge and back before the light went. It was tradition older than most of the men riding it. Nobody remembered anymore which year it started or which death it had first been meant to honor. She came in the side door a little before the bikes lined up, wearing a coat too thin for the weather and a scarf someone at the advocate's office had probably pressed on her before she left. She did not look like the woman who had sat on a curb in August with her wrist raw and her eyes fixed on a dog's paws. She looked like someone who had learned, in 4 months, that a room could be safe without her having to check its exits first. She stopped in front of the frame before anyone told her it was there. She stood a long moment reading the note through the glass, the looping blue ink she had once carried folded against her own skin, and beside it the photograph of a woman in a denim jacket squinting into a sun she'd never shared. Nobody explained it to her either. Nobody needed to. "You kept it," she said, not as a question. "Wasn't mine to throw away," he said. She nodded once, the way she'd learned to nod at things that didn't require more than that, and turned toward the lot where the engines were starting to gather their low chorus, riders swinging leather-legged onto seats, breath showing white in the cold. The road captain caught her eye and lifted his chin toward an open bike, a helmet already resting on the seat like it had been waiting for her specifically. She rode pillion behind him through the gate, out onto the 2-lane, the column stretching long and dark and orderly ahead of them, past the fields gone brown and stubbled, past the water tower with its faded town name, toward Black Ridge and the pump island that had once held her still under a merciless sun. Somewhere in the middle of that column, unseen, someone kept a slow count of bikes the way they always did, out of habit more than need. Black Ridge came up the way it always did from that road, slow and then all at once, the water tower first, then the church steeple, then the low string of buildings along Main Street that had been dying in the same unhurried way for 30 years. The column slowed to pass through it, engines dropping to a murmur, the sound rolling between the storefronts like something the town remembered from a long time ago and had forgotten to be afraid of. She held on loosely, the way he'd told her to, her chin tucked against the wind, and when they passed the gas station, Route 9 Fuel and Feed, the sign gone now, the pumps hauled off for scrap sometime in October, she didn't turn her head to look at it. He noticed that. He didn't ask her about it, and she didn't offer. There is no ceremony in a thing like that. No one stopped the bikes and pointed. No one said, "Here, this is where it happened. This is the ground." The column simply passed the lot the way it passed the diner, and the shuttered hardware store, and the church with its new coat of white paint, and kept going, 20-some engines carrying their sound down a street that had once held her still, under a sun that didn't care whether she lived or not. Back in Iron Ridge, in the clubhouse, the frame caught the last of the afternoon light exactly the way it had that morning, a slant across the glass, gone in 10 minutes, back again tomorrow, the note inside it, the photograph beside it, 2 pieces of paper that had never known each other in the years they were written, now sharing a wall because a man had refused to look away twice in one lifetime, 31 years apart. What the debt had asked for, both times, was silence. A young woman kept quiet by threat. A young woman kept quiet by cuffs and heat, and a note meant to be read only by whoever the family had paid to look the other way. The debt collectors had understood, correctly, that silence was cheap and cost them nothing, and that most people, most of the time, rode past. He had not ridden past. That was the whole of it, the entire arithmetic. Not heroism, not reckoning, just a man who stopped for a barking dog and stayed long enough to read a piece of paper someone had folded small enough to hide. The column moved on through the cold toward the highway, and behind them, Black Ridge settled back into its long quiet, the way towns do, holding what happened to it, the way a ledger holds a number nobody has bothered yet to erase.